Thanks so much for the invite, and I'm just going to hop right into it because we have a lot of great presentations coming afterwards. So what are we talking about in Control Shift Volume 4? So, nice. I am going to be touching on conversations with machines and specifically UX design for chatbots. A quick little agenda of what I'm going to walk through. My story, my story, what a conversation is generally between humans and between machines. How are they the same? How are they different? And then my experience recently designing a chatbot at BMO. So a little bit about me and my story. I have always been a bit of a chatterbox. I had no issues having conversations as a little kid. I was thrown into kindergarten and said bye mom and easily made friends with others, introducing myself. I had much older siblings and family members, so I was socialized around adult conversation really quickly, and it became something I was pretty okay at. And in school, I was quite social and talkative, sometimes to a detriment. I was definitely that kid that got placed next to the teacher's desk. I don't know if anyone else was that kid, but strategically placed next to them, or sometimes they'd put me next to the really focused and quiet kid, which also some of you might be, and in an attempt so that I wouldn't talk, but usually around a week or two I would break them and we'd become disruptive again. Fast forward a bunch of years, I actually unintentionally did psychology and linguistics at Western University. And retrospectively, it makes a lot of sense. I had this great opportunity now to understand communication and conversations, which I had, always enjoyed up to this point. And, got to really dive into what is a conversation. It seems really straightforward, but in actuality, we don't often think about the intricacies of what a conversation is. We just kind of do it instantaneously. We've evolved as humans. It's what set us apart quite distinctly, our ability to communicate. But there is a lot of aspects of it that's really cool once you break it down, and maybe you'll notice them in your exchanges with each other tonight afterwards. But a conversation is just an exchange where people use language with one another to understand, to create intent, to create meaningful conversation. And there's a lot of kind of rules and building blocks to a conversation. For example, turn taking. This is the flow between conversation, and a lot of the times in developmental psych, you'll hear little kids who are learning this about conversations, and you'll hear mom go, wait your turn, don't interrupt, wait your turn. Or sometimes you'll have people that talk a lot, and they kind of will say violate turn-taking rules when you kind of wish they would stop talking. Or they talk not that much to something you just said, and you interpret that as something and maybe a little rude, and also kind of disrupting the flow. Context is obviously quite important in conversation. If I'm telling you about the beautiful tree that's blossoming and you all of a sudden bring up your date, it's not that great of a flow. It kind of disrupts it, and it doesn't make for a very pleasurable conversation. Intent is huge when we're talking about conversation, what people really mean and what are their underlining kind of intentions behind the language they're using. As humans, we're constantly trying to understand what that person meant at work or in a relationship or on a text message or on a dating app. What do they mean by that? We're always exploring these layers of conversation. Or, when your girlfriend says she's fine. So repair is super important in conversation. We want to be able to clarify what we mean when we're talking to each other. If we don't understand, we want to be able to make sure we stop and hear that in a different way so we can continue forward in a successful conversation. And of course, empathy, quite important, quite integral to us as humans and integral to design and UX. Understanding the emotions behind people. When people have a certain tone, are they angry? Are they sarcastic? There's so many different emotional elements that come with conversation. And without getting too nerdy on you about linguistics, There's also pragmatics and discourse analysis, which is, pragmatics is understanding language in the context of life. If I'm over at your apartment and I'm sitting there and your window's open and I put my sweater on and say it's cold, probably the underlining meaning of that is I want you to shut the window. You might infer that and go over and shut it for me. But there's so many kind of intricacies to conversation, and the way that we study it and break it down is quite fascinating. And discourse analysis, I did a lot of this in my undergrad. In retrospect, I wish I had. I sound old now being like, I wish I had AI in university. But I wish I had it to help study these pieces of text where I would extract a lot of data on how people talk to one another. Think about, subreddits and scripts. There's just so much information that comes from dialogue. So we know how humans communicate with each other. How do we have conversations with machines? And why does it feel so smooth, so natural and human all of a sudden? What about Gen AI and large language models is feeling really intuitive? We're kind of moving out of the era of basic chatbots. When you open your phone and you have that chatbot in the corner that you couldn't quite get rid of, or you're forced to ask a question to a customer service chatbot and it gives you 10 more questions back. It's quite prescriptive and quite annoying, frankly. And we're moving out of that era and kind of saying hello to what I thought I would say is its very sexy older brother in form of generative AI and large language models. I'm going to scratch the surface on this. This could be its own talk, its own convention, but we have an opportunity for large text and data sets to be generated and create really intentional, thoughtful prompts that are moving out of a really robotic experience we've had up to this point into a very natural conversation, mimicking that of ones we have all the time. You can genuinely text, let's say ChatGPT, like a therapist, and they'll respond. I'm sure people maybe do, depending on your benefits. And they'll respond quite intuitively with little linguistic bits like, right, you mentioned this before, and great question. There's just so much data, and it really is evoking this feeling of natural human language, and that there's a bit of an emotional component to it. And we know it's not an emotional component, it's just extremely well trained, but it feels like they really do understand us, and maybe they will. No. Who knows? Not yet. And another reason why we kind of create this sense of natural communication in these chatbots and dialogue with machines is this very long word, anthropomorphism. And it's really the idea, a little psychology tidbit, that our brain loves to project human traits. And that's why we name our Roomba, and we have really cutesy names like Siri and Alexa and Lumi, which is the product that I got to work on. We attach human empathy to a lot of things in our life, and Gen AI conversations is obviously no excuse or exemption, sorry. So the case study at BMO, I had the privilege of working on a chatbot with BMO, and as a UX designer at a bank, that's as cool as it gets. It was a really cool opportunity that got to fall in my lap, especially given my linguistics and psych background. It felt like a really natural progression, and I was excited to work on this, so I appreciate sharing it, having the opportunity. So knowing all this, I had to ask myself as a designer, how do I visually recreate an accepted conversational flow? So we had Lumi release in the bank, and it's done really quite well. You'll notice a lot of the Fortune 500, the banks are kind of slowly adapting to the idea of bringing Gen AI into the enterprises. Obviously very slowly, very intentionally, because of security risks. And I think, BMO's just about to release, whatever. You'll notice it a lot more in your everyday banking, these kind of seamless opportunities for conversation and knowledge extracting. And it was a really cool experience. I wish I could walk you through, it's so hard to see on the background right now. That's okay. You can see it here, but I'll explain it just imagine there's a nice outline around this screen here. It's a nice lo-fi wireframe, we like to call it. So yeah, I'll walk you through kind of the aspects I had to keep in mind as I designed for a lender, which was our user in this case that was going to use this chatbot and try to extract some pieces of knowledge on policy and lending that they would need to otherwise go through different websites to try to search and try to get them a really quick, thoughtful example. So with conversations, we want appropriate exit strategies. We always want to be able to get out of a conversation, and everyone knows what it's like when you can't. So oftentimes we try to make an exit from a conversation quite intentional as designers. It goes in the same place. We're not reinventing anything here. You'll see it's very prescriptive. You've seen it before. We're not reinventing the wheel. So make sure we had a good opportunity to exit the conversation. And appropriate follow-ups. This is very similar to the interface of ChatGPT. You'll see where a prompt is given to the user and they are able to respond to it. Much like if you and I were to talk, I would, nod my head and agree or get confused. Similar conversational elements. We have to see, do we agree with this? Do we have an established context? And do we disagree? Do we need to repair this? Or I like that. Let's copy it and put it into another snippet of communication that we have going. Another aspect of, I'll get through this. Another aspect of the chatbot was, a bottom-up processing. The chatbots up to this point have been top-down, we'd say, because it was quite script and prescriptive. There was only so many permutations those gnarly chatbots we had to interact with could have. And now we have the opportunity with Gen AI and large language models to have kind of infinite permutations. And we need to allow for a lot of flexibility. So you'll notice messaging now always comes from the bottom up. And, of course, we're going to choose icons like a chat bubble, which is something humans are quite familiar with at this point. We are, its origins are in comic books you see on the wall. It is an icon we're all familiar with to denote text. So that was important to use in our design library. No surprise there. And evoke thinking, a new icon, design opportunities. So if we're going to have a conversation, I'm probably going to give a little nod and some ums and some ahs, and we need to show users that the AI is thinking. And you'll see this a lot. There's a lot of really cool design opportunities for orbs and globes and pulsing to denote thinking of an interface, and it makes for a really genuine interaction, and it makes for a really smooth experience. And turn taking, we mentioned how important that is. If we have a conversation as humans, we stop and we let the other person respond. But here, when you've done your prompt, you stop, you send it over. So you want to make sure that the send button is quite clear, quite usable iconography we're used to. And overall, really had to turn this project over quick. Tried to make it as simple as possible, but it was just cool to draw parallels between linguistics and psych and see, how banks and everyday usage is slowly trying to, get Gen AI into the conversation. And yeah, I look forward to chatting with you guys. I appreciate your attention, and thanks so much.